Welcome to Pathway to Property, your go-to podcast for building a property portfolio and breaking down property markets.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Pathway to Property podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Lachlan Vidler, and I'm joined with my other co-host, Luke Clifford. Lukey.
Mate, it's good to be back. Second episode to get through. Really excited. I think the idea of this show in general is to kind of think of it like a fine wine that, that's just going to kind of marinate and get better with time.
Yeah.
So really excited for this episode, man.
Yeah, you're excited? Oh, mate, that's very good. I definitely share your sentiments. I think like all good things, they get better with time. But we're back. We are. Episode 2. Are you excited?
I am excited. Very excited, mate.
I
think the feedback after episode 1, I was getting a lot of messages, a lot of calls from existing clients. Obviously, we had a lot of people, making inquiries that were coming through that were mentioning the podcast as well. So it was really strong, feedback for that first episode, which was good.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I was actually a little bit surprised. I mean, when we were getting, that first episode planned on what we wanted to talk about, I said it to you. I said, it's not as sexy as some other topics we can cover. Definitely not as sexy as the topic that we're covering today. But I've also been very, very impressed with the feedback that we've gotten. And what's also great? The amount of people who even late in the year are still so actively looking to either build onto their portfolio or at least just start the process along for doing that. Like, I mean, I can understand, right? Late in the year, everyone's tired, everyone's fatigued. I mean, every year just gets busier and busier. And yet, the real superstars are people who are actually out there genuinely trying to improve their situation. It's just another day for them, right? Like, cool, we're in December or we're in November or whatever month it is at the end of the year, but it's just, who cares? Jump in, rip in,
100%. Like, it's coming into that silly season. So what are your kind of thoughts on people really looking to get into property, maybe even prior to the new year or at the beginning of the year and trying to get the wheels in motion for that, as opposed to the others that are kind of like, well, that silly season, a lot of drinking, a lot of, shopping.
Activities.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on people trying to kind of build that knowledge base prior to the new year?
Oh, I think the best time to start was yesterday, and the second best time is today. I mean, I think it's the classic, right? Like, we're going to see new year, new me type stuff as soon as we tick over, people are there, they're chatting with family, they're chatting with friends, you're having, your Christmas lunch or dinner or whatever it is your activities might be over that period. And people are going to naturally, they're gonna not be happy with where they're at, or even if they are happy, they know that they want more. And I think it's the classic, it's like the gym thing, right? Like, gyms are packed week 1, week 2, even week 3
don't
after
bring up
Christmas.
The gym, please.
I know you've been doing your best to get back in, but you know what I mean. Like, it's that same sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I think at the end of the day, like, the people who are most successful are the people who are like religiously, what's the word I'm looking for? They're just religiously consistent. They're religiously consistent in what they do, and it's just about showing up, right? Like, it's every day, every week I'm going to go to the gym twice, right? And it doesn't matter if some weeks they go 4 times or other times they go 2 times. They just know there's that religious consistency in them. And I think property is the same thing, right? Those people who are actually out there really trying to do the right thing and set themselves up. And for a lot of people, especially these days, they know that they're not the best people to do it. They get some help to do it. That's what most of the people who work with us come to us for. But they're always learning, listening, watching, reading, doing something. And it doesn't matter whether it's December 24, December 16, or, March 3rd. It's always, they're ready.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's a lot of listeners right now, whether they're washing the dishes, they're at the gym, or they're driving to their holiday destination, they're tuning in. And I think layering something like a podcast where they can, build that knowledge base while they're doing something in the process.
Yeah.
Kills 2 birds with 1 stone.
I was going to say, I think by the time this podcast comes out, I think we'll still be probably a week or 2 maybe from Christmas. But for those people who are already driving to their holiday destination, I'm very jealous. I'm very, very, very envious. But mate, we've got an awesome episode planned out for people today.
We do indeed. So do you want to talk them through what's in store?
Mate, I absolutely do. So this episode is going to be all about dealing with how do you plan out your acquisitions for a portfolio. And I don't just mean how do you go about, like thinking about the next property you're going to buy. I mean, how do you go and actually plan your portfolio so that by the time you start, you're actually then doing it with a full plan in place and not just for the ones or the twos, right? You excited?
I am excited. Tell me more.
Tell you more. All right. Wait. Well, I think that this episode really links in well with the first episode, which was all about the goal setting. And like I said, all that we both said, right? The reaction and response we got was awesome because I get it. Like goal setting doesn't sound, very fun, very sexy, right?
Yeah.
It's almost that boring, like what is it? Measure twice, cut once type of thing. It's nowhere near the fun part, but that links in like pretty much directly off the bat with what we're going to talk about today. And I think especially the parts that we talked about in the last episode about realistic goal setting and then also really understanding your time frame for goals, because both of those things are so key and pivotal for planning out your acquisitions and your overall portfolio plan, because if either of those two things are off, it's going to skew the entire journey for you.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So I guess the first part of this then is understanding why the portfolio building process actually exists in the first place. So for me, before you dive in, because I know you've got lots to add to this, but in my opinion, without a structured process in place, your portfolio is really just going to become, a bunch of random properties that you've just kind of shot from the hip and just hope for the best on.
That's what I say.
As opposed to rather than, actually thinking about it logically and strategically and utilizing your portfolio as a wealth building tool. So I think, the process exists to ensure that we can scale the portfolio in the most efficient way possible without hitting those roadblocks. So I think that's something that you're going to expand on in a moment. And then the other thing is, how do you avoid those big roadblocks like, capping out your borrowing capacity and things like that as well. So, do you want to kind of, share your 2 cents on those two things?
I'll give you 2 cents.
Yeah, give me only 2.
Only 2? All right. Well, I think honestly, you've hit the nail on the head in a really short sort of time frame with exactly, why the portfolio building process exists. And when we're talking about the portfolio building process, we're talking about it as a theory here, like almost like an academic theory. And I want to make that really clear to people. Like I've done a lot of podcasts across, lots of different podcasts on lots of different channels and things like that. And I have talked a little bit about this before. But I think this topic and conversation is really great because we get to really own it from the Atlas point of view here. And that's why I want to make it clear, like the portfolio building process really is like a bit of an academic concept. And if you don't follow the steps the way that you're meant to, it makes it really difficult to achieve a good result. And the good result is basically kind of the exact opposite of a lot of the things that you mentioned, right? Because they're the things that get people a little bit trapped up. So for me, and we are going to talk everybody through the portfolio building process. So I don't want you to think, oh, I don't know what that is yet. Like, what is it? We're going to talk you through that. We're going to talk you through it very shortly. But for me, the very first reason why it exists is scalability, right? Like, how often have we either us professionally, like speaking with clients or potential clients, or even us personally, like when we've gone out to a bar and had a few drinks and just ended up chatting with somebody, right? Like, you remember that time? You laugh because you know exactly the story I'm thinking of. That bloke over here, North Sydney local, Greenwood Plaza, was sitting there having a beer, and that bloke came up and we're chatting with him for like an hour and a half, 2 hours, and telling us how he's a bit capped and not sure what to sort of do with it.
How could I forget?
It really helps that scalability aspect, because if you don't follow the portfolio building process, it is very likely you're going to get capped at 1 or 2, or if you're very lucky, maybe 3 properties. But then you're gonna be done. It's not sort of one and done, but you're done for 10 years. And we're going to talk through an example a little bit later in the episode as well, where we actually really break that down. But for me, the purpose of the process existing and why it exists as well, like it doesn't just exist because we said it does. It exists because there's actually theory behind it and there's maths and it works. First and foremost, scalability. You agree?
I agree with you. I agree.
I think on top of the scalability though, we then get into the second part, which is by following that portfolio building process, it actually also works as not only a risk mitigator from I guess as the name suggests, risk, like protecting the downside, but it also is there from a diversification point of view. And I don't necessarily mean diversification just through the lens of risk. I also mean it in the sense of being able to be exposed to more markets for the upside as well, or not just more markets, more properties, more property types, more markets, more just invested assets, and for the upside, not just protecting the downside. So, like I think a really obvious one that we see all the time, and it kind of links in a little bit to the case study we're going to talk through shortly, is if you don't follow the portfolio building process, you might buy the wrong asset at the wrong stage of the portfolio. So like a really easy example for me to think of is like commercial property, right? Commercial property can be really, really good depending on what your goals are and what your plan is and blah, 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 all the rest. But very rarely, if possibly ever, is it the smartest decision to go and make your very first investment property purchase as a commercial property.
Yeah. And I think, speaking to a lot of clients, I think a lot of them do get sucked in initially to those kind of, shiny objects, not just commercial, things like your NDIS, your co-living, they look really, really attractive from, a rental yield perspective, but are they actually going to serve you well? Those kind of asset types, they are inherently risky. And although, you might be putting $50 to $100 in your pocket with those every week,
maybe as well,
if you're lucky, but if on the other side, you're not seeing a beneficial level of capital growth coming through, is it going to really achieve what you're wanting it to set out, to help you with?
And also, I guess the other side of that coin, though, is even if you aren't seeing a beneficial level of capital growth, are you seeing enough of a cash flow to offset your loss in capital growth? Because some people might go, you know what, I really just want to drive the cash flow, right? Like that's it, that's all I want. But is it enough to offset? Like, are you getting, we're effectively talking about ROI, right? Your return on investment. Are you getting a return on investment, whatever the medium that is, whether it's cash flow, capital growth, are you getting it to a level that offsets something else? And for most people, does it offset the risk that's being taken on?
Yeah. And it's interesting because the thought process of some people that we speak to is kind of like, if I get into an asset where, the cash flow is covering my expenses, and even if I didn't have to contribute any of my own personal income, I know it's just going to kind of sit away in the background and it's just going to stay there. I'm not going to be out of pocket or anything like that. I think it kind of gives them that peace of mind. But what they're not realizing is that kind of decision could actually be hurting them over the longer term, or if it's not hurting them, restricting them from getting them, further along down that portfolio building pathway.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the real nuance in what you were saying there is most people just don't know. And it's because they're not professionals. They don't have significant expertise. I mean, like what? We've bought hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of properties for clients, and most people in their lifetime, especially if they did it themselves, what are they going to do? 5, maybe 6 transactions. I don't even mean holding it. I mean transactions in their life. Like we cover that in a week, if not more. So, and I think that's a really big difference point is that a lot of people, sometimes it's the good idea fairy. It seems really good, but then, when it comes down to how does it fit within that portfolio building process, is it the right time? Is it right in general at any stage of the portfolio building process? Let's say, yes, it is right, but is it now right and correct for where we're at today? And then a lot of the time it could be no, So I think that's really, a really important point to kind of cover off on, because to me, that is what a lot of people misunderstand. And when you see it, like if you go trawl through Facebook comments and things like that, and I know it's a funny place to take this, but you always see, like, say you see an investor story, it's like somebody that's got, I don't know, honestly, it doesn't even matter how many properties they've got. You just see an article, like it comes up in your feed. It's probably from like news.com.au or realestate.com or something like that. And it's like, such and such investor, how I amassed a, $4.8 million portfolio or whatever it is. And obviously you sometimes see the stories that are like, here's my 20 or 30 or 50 property portfolio. But even on the ones where it's maybe like, 4 or 5 or 6 million, a few properties, you always see the comments, like this is how the house of cards starts. Wait until rates change. Wait until this, wait until that. And even though 99.9% of those comments are just tall poppy syndrome and there's really no actual like factual basis behind it, I think it does lend itself into what we're talking about right now, which is that if you buy the wrong assets full stop, or you buy good assets but wrong time or wrong stage, you do open yourself up to that risk, which is that if something does go not the way it's meant to, through, even just bad luck, you do open yourself up for that risk.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. And I think like the next thing that I kind of feel that we should be touching on as well, just, cognizant of the fact that acquisition period for all of the clients that we work with is the most critical, right?
Yeah.
Like if you can buy the properties that you need in your portfolio a lot earlier, you're going to maximize your time in the market to allow compounding to take effect, right? So I think people discount the power of compounding. So I think it's really, really important that you explain how compounding actually works to our listeners and why it's actually important to consider.
Yeah, well, I think most people have a general enough understanding of compounding, right? And I think most people who listen into, the smart property investment sort of network, you get it, right? Like we all see it, compound interest, whatever it might be. But I think especially when it comes to a portfolio, compounding is the thing that sets you free, right? And if you don't understand that, this is why it's never about how many properties you own. It's never about, some of the little things that people get really spun up about. Compounding, or by the thing that helps compounding, which is time, that is the single most important thing. And the compounding effect is what allows property to be such a powerful vehicle, right? So, like, I'll give you an example, right? Let's say I'm just going to use really, really easy maths here because it's late in the afternoon and I don't want anybody to come for me, right? So, let's say, right, you buy a $500,000 property and you do it with 80% debt, right?
Yeah.
So you've got a $400,000 loan, right? I'm pretty sure the maths on that's right? Let's say, again, just for the sake of easy numbers, right, that property doubles every 10 years, right? So in 10 years' time, your $500,000 property that had $400,000 of debt, so 80% debt against it, is now worth $1 million. And let's say you didn't have a loan against it, right? Sorry, not a loan. Let's say that you had it was interest only, right? See, brains already frazzled. It's that end of year period, right? So your property's now worth $1 million. It was interest only for the whole 10-year period, so you didn't pay a single dollar off it, right?
Yeah.
So the loan is still worth $400,000.
Yeah.
Now it's at a 40% LVR, right? And that's the effect of compounding right there. And it's why leverage is so powerful. Without, like, you've paid your interest bill, yes.
Yeah.
But because the value of the property has continued to compound and grow over time, and that doesn't even account for the inflation then devaluing.
Exactly, that 400K.
Devaluing that 400K, that property is now going from an 80% to a 40% LVR by doing literally nothing, right? So you imagine taking that across 5 properties, 4 properties, 20 properties, right? Like that to me is a really simple example of how one-way compounding really impacts on the portfolio decision. Now, of course, in 10 years, that $1 million property or that $1 million value on the property isn't worth $1 million today. So you've got to account for that, which I'm not going to do because it takes it way more complicated than the example was meant to be. But that is why compounding is so important. And it's why, for example, let's say you set a goal, going back to the first podcast episode. If you set a goal, let's say you set a goal of 100K in 20 years, right? It is not appropriate or factually accurate to go, well, if I can achieve 100K in 20 years based off this plan, to take the same plan
Just half it.
and half it. Exactly right.
Yeah.
So in 10 years, we're at 50.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way, right? And oh man, I can't even tell you the amount of conversations I've had with clients that we've gone and built portfolio plans for, or this or that, or having these conversations. Like we've got a client right now, and I'm very happy to say it. Like I think he might actually go work. We've already bought a property for him. We had a phenomenal result. And unfortunately, he's a guy who does tend to chase shiny objects a little bit. And he said to us, I want to rejig the plan. I want to do it faster. I want to do all this. And he literally said, okay, well, we had a plan for 20 years. I now want it in 10. I want half the goal. And I spent, man, like me and some of the other people on the team, we have spent like hours on the phone or Zoom, like explaining, showing different scenarios. And I actually think he's going to go to a different buyer's agent now, all because they promised that they could take the exact plan we put for him, pretty much, except do the shortened time frame with the commensurate shorter goal that was just halved.
They just haven't adjusted
Exactly.
inflation.
Yeah, probably. And that's the thing. Like, it's probably something like that, right?
Yeah.
But to me, it's really disappointing because we had a great result. I know he really likes us, but he's just getting caught up in people just like kind of saying bullshit, basically,
for lack of a better term.
That's to me, that's a really good example of like that compounding effect, right? So, I think that probably, before we talk about the portfolio building process, I think that what we're kind of talking about here is really linking in well to that first episode, which is that goal setting, aspect, and making sure we're setting goals that we can achieve and are realistic. And doing that across the portfolio. And I mean, you'll bring up inflation before. Like, do you want to maybe share a few thoughts around that and like the whole portfolio goal setting side and inflation?
Yeah. Look, I think a lot of people kind of shy away from taking on debt because they feel like they're just going to be, drowning in the debt, drowning in repayments. But if you put yourself in a position where you can meet those repayments comfortably or you're not having to put too much out of pocket, the beautiful thing about time is inflation's going to erode the value of that debt that you've taken out. But what you're also naturally going to see with inflation on the other side of the coin is rental rates will continue to rise. Property prices will continue to grow. So organically, the cash flow position across your portfolio is going to improve. And for a lot of our clients, it's about understanding that later on down the track, if you make the right moves, you're going to have the flexibility where you could say to your partner, or if you don't have a partner, you could just say to yourself internally, well, there's nothing stopping me. If I kind of want to look to reduce some of my debt, there's nothing stopping me or me and my partner, liquidating one or two investment properties and paying down a big chunk of that debt.
Absolutely.
If they are more risk adverse.
Absolutely. I think it's such a good point that you're touching on because like that's even in the sort of medium term, like let's say 10 years, right? If you take it the longer term and you go 20 years, for example, if not even more, like let's say, for example, right now, you're 35 to 45.
Yeah.
In 20 years' time, you're 55 to 65. Like I look around people that I know now that are 55 to 65 and like age affects people very differently now, I feel like, and like what people are able to do and, technology and blah, 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 all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
55 to 65-year-olds these days tend to be very active.
Yeah.
A lot of them are still working, not just because they have to, but because they really love it. Like, the type, like working culture and lifestyle has changed very, very much. And I guess where I'm taking this is in 20 years, even if you went very slowly, you could very much develop a 5 to 6 property portfolio as long as you were somewhat diligent. Like that's buying a property, every 4 years. Like it's not an insane thing to do.
Yeah.
And if you get up to 5 or 6 properties, inflation has really eroded that out. If you've bought smart, you follow the portfolio building process, you've got a good portfolio there, and you sell out 1 or 2 of those 5 or 6, you could still be left with 3 or 4 properties effectively unencumbered.
Yeah, exactly right.
Right? And for a lot of us, we're trying to build the generational wealth for our future generations. A lot of us, I know a lot of people that are listening. I've been doing podcasts for, 4 or 5 years now. And I remember, pretty much from the first day that I started, most people I talked to didn't come from money. Maybe they got the occasional leg up through something unfortunate like an inheritance. But most people are trying to build generational wealth. And imagine if you're, you got a couple of kids or something and you have 5 or 6 properties, you sell 2 of them, you paid out, you got 4 unencumbered, you live through life, you eventually pass, but you can hand your kids 2 unencumbered properties each.
Yeah.
Like that's the start of generational wealth. Like we're not Rupert Murdoch, but like that's insane compared to what a lot of people started with themselves.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So I think kind of shifting gears a little bit then.
Yeah.
Let's dive into, what that portfolio building process looks like.
Yep.
Pretty much from start to finish.
From start to finish.
Yeah.
Okay. So to me, right, the portfolio building process has 3 really core elements to it, stages if you want to call it that, right? We have the foundational stage, we have the acceleration stage, and then we also have the retirement stage, right? So in the foundational stage, from what I've seen, what I've experienced personally, what we've built for clients, what I've seen other people do, failures, successes, that is how we've been able to come up with this and basically, test it and see it in action, right? And know that it works, right? So in the foundational phase, what we're really focusing on here is we're trying to focus on building the asset pool as wide as possible, right? And it's got to be within your risk tolerance. I'm not saying to do things that are outside that tolerance, but we want to build it as wide as possible. And we also want to be doing it from a point of view that, to me, is also quite balanced, because building a portfolio today is so different to building a portfolio 10 years ago, which is also quite different again to 20 years ago, right? And one of the biggest factors that has changed is how serviceability is addressed, right? And it is a lot more challenging to be able to maintain and or grow serviceability so that you don't get stopped at 1 or 2 or 3 properties, right? So in the foundation, that's why trying to make sure that we're achieving an element of balance between both the capital growth and the cash flow is so important. And we're going to prove that. We're going to prove that very shortly when we take you through a case study example here of a scenario that we've smithed it out with a couple of our mortgage broker partners. We've crunched the numbers, right? So this is a real scenario. We took a few clients that we've worked with recently and kind of made a bit of a mashup. But we're going to actually prove that to you in the numbers, right? So the first stage of the foundation, like I said, really important. We want to balance that, because if you swing too hard to the negative cash flow side, and I'm fully aware and cognizant that right now, with where rates are at, pretty much all property that is worth buying, residential, we're talking here, standard resi, you are going to be out of pocket, right? But there's a difference between being out of pocket right now, maybe let's say like 5 to maybe 7, maybe even verging 10K if you've got a good deal for another reason, right? There's a very big difference between that versus the people who are going and they're out of pocket by like 20, 25, 30,000. And that sounds like a lot, but I can tell you it's not, right? Like it is not a lot of money. If you go by in most places of Sydney, even most places of Brisbane now, even a lot of pockets of Perth, right? You are going to be feeling impacts like that, right? But then equally so, you don't want to go the other side. Those people do it because they believe the capital growth is going to outweigh it, right? But then equally so, you don't want to go the other side where you're going really, really heavy, what seems like positive cash flow, because you've bought in the middle of nowhere because you want to make a couple of bucks, because it probably won't grow, right? And real wealth is made through capital growth or a combo of capital growth and sort of cash flow. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. If you're not focusing on getting growth with that leverage money, what's the point in borrowing in the first place?
Man, exactly. And I know we beat our heads against the wall sometimes talking about this, but it's so true. And it's really important that people keep that focus, right? So basically, we're in the foundation. We start to build that out. Right now, everybody's foundation is different. This is why being able to plan out your portfolio and your acquisitions is so important, because what's right for you might not be right for your mate, right? And what's right for your mate is not right for your mutual mate, right? Because it depends on so many factors. And just because you earn the same amount of money is only one factor that's important, but by no means the only important one in how to plan out your acquisitions and build a bit of a portfolio, right? So it's crucial to understand that. So in the foundation, like I'd say we typically see anywhere from maybe 3 or 4 properties.
I was about to ask you, how many properties do you typically think in your standard investor?
I would say, anywhere from probably like 3 or 4, and up to maybe, 6 to 8, right, in your foundation. Now, 8's very high, and that would be somebody who's probably very high income, very big goals, possibly a shorter time frame as well.
Amongst the clients that we work with, the standard would probably be around that 4 to 5 typically, I'd say.
I'd say 4 to 5, maybe 6 as well. I'd maybe whack 6 in, but the other side is you don't want to build out too much of the foundation so that you can never have an acceleration either. So this is where it's so nuanced, right? And it's where it's so important that you understand how to do this, because if you don't, maybe you go too hard on the foundation, maybe you go too light, right?
Yeah.
But once you get it, right? Once you work out what it is that you want and you're getting through it, we then move on to the acceleration phase. And this is where we take a really big focus on acquiring assets that, as the name suggests, is going to accelerate you, right? But is really driving you at a bit of hyper speed towards your goals. And I would say, in my experience, personally and professionally, for most people, this is cash flow. Because no matter what anybody tells me, because I'm yet to see any real data that supports this, there's no such thing as a capital growth property. Because every property grows, it's just at different times, right? So the idea of just going, I want to go buy a property here because it's a capital growth property, to me, it's a logical fallacy because it doesn't actually exist because every property grows at different times. So by that nature, it becomes very hard to focus on buying capital growth orientated property. But most people I've found want the cash flow side because the cash flow gives them liquidity. It gives them the ability to do things in life, right? Like you get paid a wage from work. If you got capital growth, that's great. But if you can't really harness it other than selling, you're tied to your job, right? So having that cash flow, it's a replacement of income. It helps set up retirement. Maybe it's supplements. Maybe it's on top of. It's choice.
So it sounds like your foundational phase is really trying to achieve that really solid blend of both capital growth and cash flow. There's a bit more stability to the portfolio. And then after that, we're kind of branching off and looking at asset types that are going to give that that influx of cash flow.
Yeah, typically, right?
Yeah.
But for other people, right? Maybe acceleration is about development. Maybe it's about the cash flow. Maybe it's about land. Like there are other things, right? And I don't want it to just be like it's cut and dry. It's only this. But I would say for 95 to 99% of people, right? It is typically cash flow orientated, right?
Yeah.
And it makes sense. It's great, like. If you could get paid the same as what your job pays you, except you don't have to go to your job because it comes from the portfolio.
Well, mate, you know how much I love my my soccer analogies. So
here we go.
When I kind of look at a foundational portfolio, really what I'm hearing is that's your back four, almost back four, back five.
I was going to say your
possibly
back
even back six.
Yeah.
But
how wide are we playing? Back six.
We've got the wing backs coming on the outside. But and then once you've got that stability there, you can then start getting your midfielders, your wingers into the mix. Something that's a bit more focused on driving what you're looking to really achieve. So, but having that foundation there, if you're leaking goals all day, every day, it doesn't matter how good your attack is.
Absolutely.
Right?
And I reckon leaking goals is probably the equivalent of leaking cash flow, right? Like that's your detriment, right? It's taking money away from your lifestyle. It's taking money away from your family. It's taking money away from being able to then acquire more properties. So to me, leaking goals is like leaking cash flow. And I reckon the early stage of your acceleration, because there's no limit to your acceleration, right? Like it can keep going, but the idea as well is that it almost gets built up a bit like a pyramid, right? Your foundation is the base of the pyramid, and you can't put a roof on top of it. You can't get that peak, which is the acceleration, without a wide enough base, right? If the base is too narrow, you're not going to get a peak as high as you want, right? But let's say you've done all that, you get to the acceleration. I reckon your first few acceleration properties, because you're now starting to deal with things a little bit more complicated, that's your midfield, right? Because they're moving up, they're moving back, right? They're there to defend and they're there to attack. They're a bit more, they're in that hybrid position of going, we need to be able to play both sides of this. But then as you get through that early stage of your acceleration, you get to that twilight part of it, that's your forwards, right? Like that's the goal. They're the people scoring the goals because that's going to be your moneymaker, right? That's the ones you've built it out, you've diversified, you've moved your risk around, you've gotten a lot more experience, a lot more education, sophistication's grown, and that's, if we switch sports now, that's the home run.
What's your property equivalent to Lionel Messi up the top there?
Well, to be honest, I think for a lot of people, the equivalent would be maybe a really well placed commercial property. I think that's probably what it is, right? If you can get a good deal, good rates, you tend to get a bit more out of it than say resi. But it's a lot more complicated. There's a lot more factors that go into a deal.
Yeah.
So
I guess stripping it down to the core, it's really just taking that real strategic approach to things and not just kind of taking that more machine gun style approach, so to speak, right?
And I love that. I think that's exactly what it is. It's people, they grab the shotgun out, they shoot it, and the bullets are spraying everywhere, and they're hoping that something that they hit is something that's good for the portfolio. But a lot of the time, to me, it's something I talk a lot about, but that's why the stats tell us, the vast majority of investors in Australia only own 1 to 2 properties. And it's because when they took that shotgun out and they tried to just spray and pray, hope it hits something, they've either not landed either of the 2 or they've only landed one of them, and that one hasn't been enough to offset the bad impacts of number 2.
Yeah.
Okay,
so I guess for our listeners then, you mentioned at the start that you've got a couple of examples.
I did.
We're looking to crunch some numbers. So I think it'll be good to kind of run through, a scenario or 2 scenarios where we've got someone who's looking to build out their foundational portfolio, someone that's kind of, wanting to make, a bit more, take a more strategic approach to things, as opposed to somebody else who's kind of looking to just purchase, maybe in their own backyard or surrounding suburbs, things like that.
Well, I appreciate the spike for me to come through here.
Come through hard.
Yeah, exactly right. Volleyball analogies are coming out here now. Mate, absolutely. And look, I think it's really good because I know, and we get the feedback on it from like other podcasts I've done, got it from even the first episode. People love examples, right? And not just examples that have been made up to fit a narrative, real examples that have been tested, right? And I've got a scenario here, and like I said, a few minutes back, this scenario, we've taken it from a few clients, put their scenario, their situations kind of together to bring a bit of like real world element to it. And we also got some of our mortgage broker partners because like they're the experts, right? Like if you want to know your borrowing power, you want to get the best result from a bank, and that's not just interest rate, it's also sometimes it's got to be solution focused, right?
Understanding banking policies.
Exactly right. So we went to a couple of them because we wanted to test across a couple of people just to make sure it all lined up, and they've helped us kind of bring that together. We've got a scenario here, all right? So what I want to do is I want to paint the situation, and then I want to paint the 2 different roads that this couple could go. And the reason we've done this is I know a lot of listeners or a lot of people in a similar boat, right? Like they're either at this stage or going to be in this stage soon. And I feel like it's a nice, well-rounded example that a lot of people can kind of see themselves in, and they can see how this might apply to their situation.
Well, hit us with it, mate.
Hit us? Okay. So I'll paint the situation first, and then we'll go through the two situations, all right? Sorry. I'll paint the situation, and then we'll talk about the options, the 2 options, all right? So the situation is we've got a couple, and the couple has 2 kids, right? Now, in that couple, one person earns about 140,000 and the other person earns about 100,000. Now, I'm sure there's some people that are going to go, well, that's quite a lot. That's a 240K household income. And absolutely, right? Definitely not saying that this is every single person out there, but through what I see every single day, there are a lot of people and a lot of couples that are starting to earn this money. And of course, inflation and other things is eating away the value of that money. But earning 140K isn't just for the lawyers from 20 years ago. Like we see a lot of like tradies or blue collar workers that are earning that sort of money. We see a lot of people that are sort of early mid-tier professionals.
Pay rise.
If the podcast blows up, you can have the pay rise. Or just people that might even be small business owners, right? So like seeing that kind of money and then another partner that's sort of on that maybe 100K, like we see it quite a lot, right? That's where we got the numbers from, all right? Now, this couple, they bought a principal place of residence. They bought their own home in the early 2010s, right? So sort of 9 to 10 years ago, and this is based in Sydney, right? So I think we loosely looked at numbers around that sort of like northern suburbs region, like maybe Eastwood. I just knocked the mic, Eastwood or something like that, right? And that property has now got substantial equity. Now the couple, of course, have got some savings there, but the real key piece of leverage for them is that they've got equity in their home, right? And they've got substantial equity because they bought the property almost 10 years ago, all right? Now, the couple knows that the way they've set themselves up for now is not going to be enough for retirement, right? Like they put into super, same as everyone else, they save, but they know for what they want and for what they want to leave their kids, it's just not enough for what they need, okay? So they want to invest, but they're not sure of the right route to go. But they've come up with 2 options, right? Option 1 is something that we see and hear all the time. And I mean, God, even I've been guilty. In the early days, when I was starting to invest, even I was guilty of sort of thinking of it this way. And we've spoken about it as well. And I'm pretty sure you've said that you were guilty as well, right? But option 1 was, they just want to invest in the local area, and they want to do it because they feel like they know it. They can go and drive past the investment property. It just feels safe. They feel like they know the best streets, the best
Check
coffee.
on the tenants.
Check on the tenants, right? For whatever they're going to do if it
Yeah.
looks like there's something wrong. It's something I love about all the time. People go, I'm going to drive past. I'm going to see what's going on. I say, okay, what are you expecting to see? Like, unless the grass is overgrown, which even then is, it's not great, but like, it's not like you're going to take that to the civil and administrative tribunal. What are you going to do? Or people go, if it's close, I can go fix some stuff. I go, mate, you're a lawyer. Like, I didn't realize you got your electrician's ticket the other day. Like, what are you going to do? Anyway, I digress, right? So that's option one for these guys, is in the local area because they feel like they know it. It's comfortable. It's safe. They've had some friends that have done it. Maybe they've had a brother or a sister that's done it. But more than anything, it probably feels safe because they feel like they know it better, right?
That bias there.
That bias, that confirmation bias, right? And then we have option number two, right? Option number two is that they could be highly strategic. They could follow the portfolio building process. They can create either for themselves if they feel like they have the knowledge. But I think from the scenario, we can kind of understand they don't have the knowledge. So probably come, have a chat with us, develop out a portfolio plan for themselves. And then they can go and invest in the best performing markets, irrespective of where they are in Australia, right? As long as they've got the right team set up, they've got the right processes, they can be highly, highly strategic to get the best property for them, regardless of where it is, okay? So that's the scenario. I'm going to talk you through the two options today, how that works, and then look at what the difference is after 3 years. And I want to say, so as I've mentioned before, right, we've got we've had our help from our mortgage broker partners. We've also then gone and indexed numbers for in 3 years' time to add some realism, right? Like boosted their salaries, boosted their expenses, done all that, so we can actually see a real life, potential, hypothetical, if you want to call it that, of what it kind of looks like. All right. So option number one, which was the local area. They decide that they go and buy a $1.2 million apartment in the local Sydney area, right? And unfortunately, that is not that expensive these days, right? Like, it's in Bondi, it's in the north, it could be Chatswood, even starting to go into that, in that inner west area. 1.2 mil for an apartment, for an investment property is not a lot, right? And a lot of people sit there, they go, it's close to the city, it's going to be this, it's going to be that, like there's appeal to it. So against that idea, it's local.
Yeah.
They can touch it, they can see it, they feel comfortable, right? They know the coffee shop's good, right? Now they're going to put down a 20% deposit on this property. And based off, having a look at the data from markets in Sydney, and we've obviously got access, a quick little plug, right? Our portfolio, suburb research platform that we own, over 450 million data points in it, right? So we use that for our clients. We use that to help analyze this scenario, right? So we're probably working off about a 3.8% yield, all right? Which on a $1.2 million apartment,
pretty reasonable.
I think pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
It's about $875 to $900 a week. And
Yeah.
I think if you looked around, most people go,
Be in that ballpark.
That's probably fair enough, right?
Yeah.
Now, because this couple hasn't been very strategic, they've just got in their local area, we've benchmarked the capital growth at about 5%. And the way that we got that is there have been a lot of studies done, and the numbers keep changing, but the average the Australian property market grows by is the numbers actually coming down. So this idea that we double every sort of 10 years is actually tends to not be strictly true, right? So that's where we got the 5% capital growth number from. It's more around a bit of an average because they haven't been so strategic. But we've said because there is such a crisis of rental properties everywhere, especially Sydney, that we're going to experience about 5% rental growth, okay? So in 3 years' time, that property's gone from 1.2 million up to about 1.39 million. All right. So that's about $190,000, right? Not too bad.
Yeah, not too shabby.
Not too shabby, right? It's $190,000 they didn't have before. Not too bad, right? The rent, it's gone from $875 up to about $1,015. Okay. So we're going to pause there. We're going to go through option number two, and then we're going to compare them. All right. So option number two. So they want to be way more strategic about what they're doing, right? Build out the process, get us to help them build a portfolio plan, and they realize that they can actually go and spread that money a little bit wider. So to do that, what we would do for them, or what in this scenario, I guess what we do really every day, it wasn't really designed, this wasn't meant to be pitched that way, but that's sort of the way it's gone, right? We'd look at diversifying into two properties, and we get two houses, right? Because houses, you get the land value, and that's the asset, much better than apartments in the sense, typically speaking, just in the sense you control more, you've got more control over the asset,
Yeah.
you get the land, right? It's a lot better in that sense, okay? And historically, houses do perform a lot better than units anyway, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to get two $650,000 houses, and they could be anywhere in Australia, right? Obviously, we're only going to be talking about in big markets that are worthwhile to be investing in, not out in the middle of the outback. But the numbers and the data and the research tells us good markets to be in, right? Now, that property is going to rent at about a 4.8% yield, which means it's going to rent for about $600. So $650K buy, $600 rent, right? Now, because we've been a lot more strategic, we're actually going to run the capital growth at about 9%. Now, I want to say, right, I think if you're investing strategically, you should be getting a lot more than 9%, right? Like what we average around 20%. We average, like that's where we average it, right? Now, I think that's very high to use as an example in this, just to try and illustrate something, but we're going to do 9%, okay? We're going to keep the same 5% rental growth, though. I think it would be more, but we're going to keep the same 5%, okay? So we take those two $650K properties. The portfolio is now going to be worth about $1.68 million, right? The rent, so we're two at 600, so we started 1,200 for the portfolio.
Yeah.
Now going to be worth about 1,390, okay? So
Yeah, wow.
let's actually talk the difference though, right? And the difference isn't just what happens from a monetary point of view. The difference is also about the portfolio building side, okay? So there's a difference of about $295,000 in capital growth in just 3 years. In 3 years, right? Imagine that over 5, 10, 15, 20 years, right? So 300 grand almost of difference in just 3 years, right? We've gone and run all the cash flow calculations off this. So, your rent versus your expenses. And we've already done a lot of numbers, so I don't want to go into the detail of it. But option 2, you would have about 20% better cash flow after costs, all right? So you're getting more capital growth, you're getting better cash flow. Now, talking to the future, borrowing power, right? By diversifying your assets, by bringing in more rent, by having more assets as well, because it helps to then spread it around from the bank's point of view for risk, you're actually going to end up, after 3 years, you're now going basically, hey, we want to buy our next property in both scenarios.
Yeah.
In the second scenario, you actually end up with typically between about 100 to 150K of better borrowing capacity, which then means when you get down to it, you could potentially, in option 2, get into not only a third, but also a fourth property at year 3, compared to in scenario 1, where you're only really probably going to be able to get your second property. Because remember, you only bought one. In scenario 2, we bought 2. And then at the end of the 3 years, we could get definitely the third and potentially even the fourth. But in scenario 1, we bought one and we could probably only get the second one.
All by being strategic and splitting those purchases as opposed to...
Exactly right. And it's not about how many properties you have, but as we've just shown, by splitting it up, not only can you get a better return by being strategic, but also you diversify your risk. It gives you the benefit of being in multiple markets. So you start to spread that around the country, different markets peaking and cycling at different times, different economic risks, different political risks. It is a much safer, but also better performing result for the portfolio. And also it gives you the option then down the road, like let's say life circumstances happen. Let's say you want to change, you want to be in a different stage of your portfolio. You've got more options for strategic sales choices.
That's true, yeah.
Rather than one asset, where all your money is stuck in it, or two properties where all your money is stuck.
The tax considerations with CGT.
Exactly right. Like it's like you bring it all together. Like it allows holistically a way better option for somebody.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, mate. I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, so what did you say? So with the first one, what kind of capital growth were they seeing with that after the 3 years, and then comparing that to the second one?
So overall, there was about I ran through the numbers, but it was about 295,000, right? So if you want to round about 300, right? 295, $300,000 of difference in just 3 years between option 2 and option 1. Right?
Yeah,
and I can guarantee you, right, in option 1, as we were discussing, they felt like, oh, well, I know the area, I know it's good, I feel like it's going to perform, I know the local spots, it's a good area, good families. Yeah. But they based it on emotion not based on fact and analysis and strategic investment decision making.
Yeah.
And we get into that spot, you know?
Yeah.
So suddenly in 3 years, right, the kids, I think when we were running the scenario, so the kids were like 10 and 12. Kids are now, 13 and 15, right? Like still spending lots of money going, all that. But they've just been able to generate an extra $300,000. They've had 20% better cash flow after costs as well. Like it's a no-brainer.
It's a massive difference,
right?
yeah.
But for most people, because they don't know how to do it strategically themselves, and other than the obvious of come and chat with, us, it means that they just go in the local area, and they get distinctly worse results. And then that plays into the whole stats that 91% of property investors only own 1 or 2 investment properties.
Yeah. And I guess apart from buying in your own backyard or areas just that you're familiar with, what do you think are some of the other major pitfalls of, that people experience, I guess, when planning out their acquisitions?
Yeah, absolutely. I reckon the first one, which we kind of touched on a little bit, is you could be in a good property, but it could be the wrong time of the portfolio. Yeah. Right? Now, do I think that apartment in that example, would I buy it probably ever? No, I wouldn't. But if you substitute that and say you bought, a really negatively geared house in like the eastern suburbs of Sydney, and you were wealthy enough to be able to spend $4 million on it, and it's it's in a pocket there, and the cash flow considerations don't really impact you. Maybe in your acceleration phase, and you can develop it. Maybe in your acceleration phase, that is a good choice, right? But that's an extreme example, of course. But like we see it all the time. Properties that might have been okay or good properties. Maybe they were, maybe it's a commercial. Maybe it's like a resi development deal. Maybe it's, a duplex or something like that. Yeah. Not necessarily bad properties, but wrong time of the portfolio. So you end up getting stunted. And like we just went through in that example, in 2 or 3 or 4 years' time, when you compare it to what route you could have taken, you are hundreds of thousands of dollars of growth, of income, and future borrowing power off. Yeah. Compared to that. So to me, that's probably the first one. Yeah. I'll throw it to you.
Well,
what's one you see?
Yeah. Something that I see a lot is people being too focused on negative gearing. Yeah. And it's all about, trying to reduce their taxable income. They get kind of, tied into all the, the spruiking around the depreciation benefits and all that kind of stuff. So they end up selecting asset types just purely from a tax outcome perspective, as opposed to trying to get the best possible performance. Yeah. And look, who doesn't want to save on tax? I think everybody wants to save on tax. Yeah. But it shouldn't be your primary focus, and you shouldn't be trying to save on tax at the detriment of significant capital growth as well.
And you know what? I could not agree with you more. And big shout out to my accountant, Jeremy. He gave me two one-liners that I love, right? First one is negative gearing is not a property investing strategy. It's a tax outcome.
Absolutely. Right. And what a lot of people don't realize as well is all the depreciation that you claim over the lifetime of holding that property, if you were to sell it later down the track, if you found that it wasn't performing as well as you hoped for, it actually reduces your the cost base of the property. So you end up paying the CGT.
yeah.
Right.
It's all these little things, right? So, I loved it. I loved it when Jeremy said that, because, it plays into what you were just saying. Yeah. It goes into all these aspects. People, like you said, people love to save on tax. But what people don't realize is, and this is the second thing he said to me, is if you're making money, you're going to pay tax, right? So as much as we don't want to do it, the reality is that if you go, and like this is something that people don't understand, right? Like you got your tax brackets. So let's just say that you're in the, they've just changed them. So I don't know if the 32.5% bracket still exists, right? But if you go and you're saving on your tax, it means you're making a claim, right? And whilst we're definitely not here giving financial advice or anything, if you're making a claim, it means you've spent money. Now, if you spend money, you get to claim that back, and it reduces your taxable income, right? But what that means is you're spending $1 to save 32.5 cents, or whatever it is, right? Yeah. So like in what world do people think, and we see this, and I guess getting to the heart of like the planning of portfolio decisions out, right? In what world does it make sense to spend, like what is it, 67.5 cents to save 32.5? Like, let's do that deal right now. Let's do that deal right now, right? I'll give you 32.5 cents, and you give me, 67.5, right? It's crazy. Yeah. It's crazy. So that's to me, that's the second one. I love that point, mate. I love it, right? Big pitfall, thinking you need to negatively gear, save on tax is the only way to invest in property. And for me, I reckon the third one to round out the episode is trying to be an active investor, all right? Now, by no means am I saying that being an active investor is bad, but what I do mean is what I see all the time is people, maybe they've left it very late, right? Let's say you're very late 40s or 50s or something.
I was going to say, I hear this all the time. It's late 40s, late 50s. They're wanting to fast track it.
Exactly right. It's the fast
that quick fix kind of thing.
Divorce, right? Or something's gone wrong, business has failed, whatever it is. And then we end up having those conversations, like you said, hear it all the time. I remember I hear it all, I used to hear it all the time. Don't hear it as much anymore with you helping me out with some of that stuff. But people going, I got 10 years. I got to do it. And they go, oh, I don't mind. I can be hands-on, right? I don't mind. Or do a bit of developing. Like, let's subdivide something. Let's do this. And they've got no experience. It's the wrong time of the portfolio. And it doesn't mean that you can't be an active investor, but it's just not the right time.
Yeah.
Get a few runs on the board, right? Get a few deals done. Then do a couple of small renos, right? Experience what it's like to project manage some people, experience what it's like to have some cost overruns. Just experience it rather than going, I've never owned property and now suddenly I want to do a 10-lot unit, subdivision development. Yeah. And it's all because, I've run out of time,
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, you want to build out that foundation properly because you want to have that safety net as well. Because if you do kind of dabble into those more high risk, kind of higher reward kind of opportunities, if shit does hit the fan, and more often than not, they do, you want to have something to fall back on. If you go straight all guns blazing into something like a small scale development with no experience, what happens if it all goes wrong and you deplete all your funds? You're starting from ground zero again.
Exactly right, mate. Exactly right. Well, I reckon producers looking at us. I reckon we might have to call out stumps for today.
Might have to wrap it up, I think.
Well, look, thanks for listening in, guys. We really enjoyed and had a lot of fun playing this out. I hope you really enjoyed the case study to see, and learning about the portfolio building process and I guess effectively how to plan out your acquisitions. Now, if you are looking for some help, looking to build out your portfolio, come and have a chat with myself and Luke and the broader team at Atlas Property Group. You can jump on our website, atlaspropertygroup.com.au, and book in a call with us. Excitingly, you know what? We probably should have said it right at the start. We've just been nominated for 3 awards in the REB Awards: Buyer's Agent of the Year, Innovator of the Year as an individual for me, and Innovator of the Year as a company. And that's because of all the crazy tech platforms like the Suburb Research one I was talking about earlier, developing that out and having access to all that, being recognized for that innovation, and everyone knows tech is the future. So
what if someone wants a sneak peek on that research platform?
Oh, a sneak peek. Well, you got to come, book a bit of a call with us. Let us know that you're ready to kick the portfolio off, and we might be able to give you a bit of a sneak peek on that. But yeah, anyway, guys, thank you for tuning in. Come and have a chat with myself and the team. atlaspropertygroup.com.au. We'd love to chat with you, but otherwise, please wait out. Listen in for our next episode coming very, very shortly. We hope you have a great holiday break, and please send us your feedback as you're listening to this on your Christmas drive or wherever it is that you are over this next month. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property, or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.